I want to read to you again this I want to emphasize Matthew 4:12 through 17. He quoted it, but it says, I'll start in verse 13. It says, leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum, which was by the lake in the area of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was said through the prophet Isaiah. Now here's the words of the prophet Isaiah. He said this approximately 750 years before Jesus was born. He said, land of Zebulun and land of Naphtali, the way to the sea along the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. What's significant is that Capernaum is in Naphtali, Nazareth is in Zebulun, and they called Galilee the Galilee of the Gentiles because here you're bumping up very quickly against Syria and Gentile area, and around Galilee was the area that we call the Decapolis, the 10 Gentile cities. So really, I mean, you couldn't get a more accurate prediction 750 years prior to what Jesus actually experienced as he lived here. Let me see, what else did I want to say here? It's the passage in Matthew chapter 8 when he referred to the centurion. Then Jesus entered Capernaum. This is Matthew 8:5. A centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home paralyzed and is terribly suffering. Jesus said to him, I will go and heal him. The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was astonished and said to those who are following him, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. So that's the centurion that paid for the original synagogue. Now, we had some questions about this structure. Here, first of all, you see some of the insulate houses going up to the structure, and that is a Franciscan church. What we'll see in this lesson and throughout our tour is that the Catholic Church owns huge properties in Israel. This was one of them, and this is the Franciscans were very much responsible for opening up Capernaum and seeing the archaeological sites and so forth. And this church is a church that hovers, so to speak, over the site that is attributed to be the home of Peter. Now, in this church, the floor over the home is glass. So the only way to look really down into the house is to be inside the church. Sometimes it's open, sometimes it's not. But this is what the site of St. Peter's house looked like prior to that church being built. Now, what we need to understand is, we'll talk a little bit about attestation. How do we know that these places are what they say they are? So nothing that you're looking at there is actually the home of Peter. We're talking about the site of Peter's home. This is a later church wall, probably a Jewish Christian church that was built much later. This interior here is a place of worship, but that's not a house, right? You can understand that. The site, however, is a site where, as the archaeologists looked into the dig, they find that very, very early on, we have Christian graffiti from first century times at this site as a place of worship. And they ask themselves the question, well, why would they be coming here to worship? And that's the secret to attestation, and that is, what's the earliest record of activity, religious worship or gathering or something at a particular site, and why would they be gathering at this site? And this we know Peter is from Capernaum. We know that he was a fisherman here, it's a fishing village. We know that he lived here, and very early on, this site was associated with where Peter lived, and so Christians gathered here and worshipped here. These particular structures were not, as I said, Peter's house. It's more like the location of where Peter's house was. But those, so you go back and back and back and back and back, and the principle is the farther back you go, the closest you get to institutional knowledge, to knowledge that of things that really happened there. And so it's pretty well accepted by archaeologists that this was at least the site of worship of Peter's house, or at least it was considered to be the site of Peter's house by those who were his almost immediate people. So they would probably know best. So that's kind of why that is venerated in that way. This is what it looks like now when you peek in. You're underneath the church floor there, and if you were to be in the church, you're looking down through glass. And you might ask yourself, why is it that there? See, in many places, the Catholic Church just built a church on top of stuff, right? I mean, that's typical. As you go through Jerusalem, you'll see it. Everywhere you go, you'll see this church here? Well, this is the site that such and such happened. And there's nothing that tells you that it happened there. It's just a church is plopped there. So you have to think, well, why would this church be here? Well, in this particular site, as the archaeologists uncovered this, and they made the attestation to Peter and the early worship site and so forth, they also found bones. There is a law in Israel. Let me see if I can see a good picture of the thing. There's a law in Israel that says if you find bones, you can't build on that site. There's a certain perimeter that you have to keep clear in order to have any construction nearby. And so I was with a guide once, and I said, well, how is it that I know you found bones here. How is it that you're building this building? You see how the building is on stilts? They're just outside the perimeter, okay? And so when I asked him, I said, how is it that you guys could build this building here? He goes, we are a nation of lawyers. So that's how they got away with that one. But so that's kind of on stilts. It's not construction over where they found the bones. There's the synagogue once again. This is kind of obviously I ripped this off of the internet, but anyway, it shows you kind of how the houses would be. You see like the courtyard centers, the flat roofs, and that's probably meant to be the synagogue, that big building there. But in any event, that's kind of just an artist's rendition of what it might have looked like in terms of the harbor. Okay, so next. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about a place called Tabgha. Tabgha is a location right along the Sea of Galilee. That guy's actually standing on the beach. The sea is this way. And now I'm going to talk to you about attestation the other way, okay? Because Tabgha, that's a Byzantine church that's there. It's associated with the feeding of the 5,000, okay? And it's associated with the calling of the disciples, and it's associated with the reinstatement of Peter, which the Catholic Church would call the primacy of Peter, okay? So all of these things somehow get associated with this location. And you're like, how do we get all that? Here's what it looks like from the church. Here's what the church looks like from the lake. And here's where we have to be a little bit discerning as we kind of listen to or read the monuments here. Obviously, it's on the Sea of Galilee, right? So no question there. And could it have been the place where Jesus initially called the disciples that, I'll make you fishers of men? Sure. But that could have been anywhere along the Sea of Galilee, okay? Could it have been the place where Jesus is making the fire in John 21 and the resurrection has happened? Peter has denied him 3 times. And Jesus says to Peter, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, kind of reinstating Peter. Yeah, it certainly could have been here. It was along the Sea of Galilee, and it's a good place for that. Could it have been the place where Jesus fed the 5,000? Does anybody have a Bible here? No. Tim has a real Bible. Okay, Tim, look up John 6:3. That's a really tiny little print.
Yeah, unfortunately. When I had better eyes. 6:3. Jesus set up on the mountains, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand.
Okay, so that's what you said the important part.
Yep.
It locates the feeding of the 5,000 in the first sentence, and it says Jesus what? Nice and loud.
Sat on a mountain.
Sat on a mountain.
Mountain.
It's not there. It could be the one behind it.
That's a little hill.
But well, they call that a mountain.
Oh, okay.
So they're not from the Rockies. So in New Jersey we call that a mountain too. All right. So in any event, so it's almost certainly not the place. But there's a whole nother church that has the breaking of the loaves and the fishes and a whole other thing, and there's a whole tradition there. And so that's one of the things that when we go, we have to have our Bibles open to say, okay, so this is what they're saying. Is this possible? That's not possible for here. It is possible though for the other things, and I wouldn't. And if you go, I think we might go there just kind of like for a minute or two. But they have a big church there called the Primacy of Peter Church, and the Catholic Church makes a big point to say that when Jesus reinstated Peter, he made him the first pope. But that's really not what we see in the Scripture. What we see in John chapter 21 is Jesus saying, you caught all these fish and, come to me. And Peter jumps out of the boat. And then after they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said to Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Take care of my sheep. The third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt. Do you love me? 3 times. He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And he's each of those is kind of taking back Peter's denial. You could imagine that could happen here, okay? It's by the side of the sea. But again, was it this very place? And every once in a while, we just have to ask ourselves, okay, I'm going to use some creative imagination and see that this could have been the place where he was reinstated. All of this is taking place by the Sea of Galilee, and we'll spend a lot of time touring around the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, if you read Scripture, goes by different names. One of the names in the Old Testament is the Sea of Kinneret. I don't know why that is. Kinneret means harp. So some people have said, if you look down on the Sea of Galilee, it looks like the shape of an ancient harp. I don't know how they would have looked down. I mean, maybe. But in any event, but it means harp. So in Numbers, it's called the Sea of Kinneret. In Joshua, it's called the Sea of Kinneret. You'll also hear it called in the New Testament the Sea of Gennesaret, which is kind of a related word, but it doesn't mean harp. It means garden, specifically Garden of the Prince. And it is a very garden-like atmosphere in Galilee. Galilee is gorgeously green, at least I hope it is when we go. And it's a beautiful, as opposed to the south, which is desert. This is a garden-like place. You'll also hear it called the Sea of Ginosar, which also means garden. Not Garden of the Prince, but it means rich garden. So that kind of theme runs through the various names of the Sea of Galilee. The word Galilee actually means district. So when you're there, you will hear Jews not say, I'm going to Galilee. They will say, I'm going to the Galilee, the district. And it means the northern district, okay? So we kind of, it's not really a place name as much as it's a kind of a catch-all. I'm going to the district. So it's interesting to kind of see that. And this is the place where Jesus did so much of his ministry. Mark 1 says this, as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. At once they left their nets and they followed him. And so that went on. That's where the disciples were called. So all along the sea. I want to show you a video which just kind of locates, kind of pulls back up from the sea and locates the various situations or areas where Jesus was active around the Sea of Galilee, real briefly. Again, you got to take Bethsaida with a little grain of salt. Here's